In the later centuries of the Ottoman Empire, a widening gap emerged between those who ruled and those who labored. While imperial elites celebrated lavish festivals, built grand palaces, and adopted costly Western fashions, ordinary subjects struggled under rising taxes, inflation, and economic uncertainty. This imbalance between privilege and hardship fueled resentment, undermined loyalty to the state, and contributed to deep social unrest that would haunt the empire in its final centuries. The Ottoman ruling class, comprising the Sultan, palace officials, high-ranking bureaucrats, and military elites, had long enjoyed wealth and prestige. However, from the 17th century onward, displays of luxury became more visible and more controversial. Public ceremonies grew increasingly extravagant. Court festivals featured imported fabrics, fireworks, elaborate banquets, and performances inspired by European courts. Palaces along the Bosphorus multiplied, each more ornate than the last, signaling not strength but excess to a population facing economic decline. At the same time, the empire's financial foundations were weakening. Continuous wars with European powers drained the treasury, while outdated tax systems failed to generate stable revenue. To compensate, the state increasingly relied on heavier taxation of peasants, artisans, and merchants. New levies were introduced, old exemptions removed, and tax collection was often outsourced to private contractors who prioritized profit over fairness. For ordinary people, this meant higher costs of living with little protection from abuse. Inflation further worsened conditions. The influx of silver from the New World into Europe disrupted global currency values, and the Ottoman economy was not immune. The value of the akçe steadily declined, eroding purchasing power. Wages failed to keep pace with rising prices of bread, fuel, and basic goods. For soldiers, craftsmen, and urban workers, survival became more difficult, even as the elite continued to spend lavishly. Western influence intensified the sense of injustice. Beginning in the 18th century, Ottoman elites increasingly adopted European lifestyles. French-style clothing, furniture, architecture, and entertainment became fashionable among the upper classes. While reformers viewed this cultural exchange as modernization, many subjects saw it as betrayal. To them, Western-style excess symbolized moral decay, wasteful spending, and disconnection from Islamic and Ottoman traditions. Public anger grew not only because of poverty, but because inequality was visible. Grand processions passed through streets lined with struggling families. Imported luxuries filled elite homes while local industries declined. The contrast between palace life and village hardship was impossible to ignore. Rumors of corruption, favoritism, and waste spread rapidly through coffeehouses, markets, and mosques. The Janissaries, once a pillar of the state, became a reflection of this broader unrest. As inflation reduced their salaries' value, many turned to secondary trades or extortion. Their grievances were not only economic, but symbolic. They felt excluded from elite privilege while still being expected to defend the empire. Repeated revolts in Istanbul and other cities were often sparked by unpaid wages, rising prices, or resentment toward reformist elites perceived as serving foreign interests. Religious scholars and preachers also voiced criticism. Many condemned extravagance as un-Islamic and warned that divine punishment awaited rulers who ignored justice. Sermons increasingly linked economic suffering to moral decline at the top. This fusion of economic grievance and religious rhetoric proved powerful, mobilizing public opinion against court excess. Attempts at reform often deepened tensions. Efforts to modernize the army, bureaucracy, and economy required new taxes and centralized control. While reformers argued these measures were necessary to save the state, ordinary people experienced them as additional burdens. Meanwhile, elite lifestyles showed little sign of restraint. This contradiction weakened trust in reform itself. Urban riots became more frequent. In cities like Istanbul, Edirne, and Damascus, protests erupted over bread shortages, tax increases, and perceived injustice. Shops were looted, officials attacked, and demands shouted in public squares. Though often spontaneous, these uprisings reflected long-standing frustration rather than momentary anger. In rural areas, conditions were no better. Peasants faced land seizures, heavy taxation, and declining agricultural productivity. Many abandoned their villages, swelling city populations and increasing unemployment. Others joined bandit groups, challenging state authority in the countryside. These movements were not merely criminal, they were responses to economic desperation and social exclusion. The state's response relied largely on repression. Revolts were crushed, leaders executed, and order temporarily restored. Yet the underlying problems remained unresolved. Luxury at the top continued, inequality deepened, and public anger simmered beneath the surface. By the 19th century, the empire faced a legitimacy crisis. Subjects increasingly questioned whether the state served the common good or merely protected elite privilege. Western observers often criticized Ottoman inefficiency, but internal voices were sharper, accusing rulers of abandoning justice, restraint, and responsibility. Ultimately, luxury and inequality did not alone destroy the Ottoman Empire, but they weakened its social fabric. When hardship is shared, societies endure. When wealth and suffering exist side by side without balance or accountability, resentment grows. In the Ottoman case, this resentment eroded loyalty, fueled unrest, and made reform far more difficult. The story of luxury and public anger in the Ottoman Empire is not merely one of decline, but a warning. Power divorced from responsibility breeds instability. Prosperity that benefits only a few invites resistance. As the empire struggled to survive in a